Welcome to Pop Culture Roulette for all your pop culture needs. We're America's hairiest podcast.
I was wondering if that was the route you were taking.
Yeah, well, once again, we're without Jeremy. Apparently, still at spring training, so must have made the first round of cuts, or they didn't realize he wasn't supposed to be there. So, maybe
Yeah,
we'll get him back next week. Who knows? Surely by then they'll have cut him,
they'll caught
becomes
on that he doesn't belong there.
unless he becomes the next say, hey Willie Mays, or what Willie Mays Hayes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how fast Jeremy is. We talked
yeah,
about that in our combine episodes.
that is true. Yeah, I mean, he's faster than me at this point. That's definitely for sure. I don't know where you stand on these things these days.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. One of these days I'll challenge him to a
So,
duel of the foot speed.
so we're gonna do an episode here that's gonna be a little challenging is not quite the word, but basically
Out of our wheelhouse.
definitely out of our wheelhouse. So basically, we have been on record as saying if you reach out to us and request a topic, we will do it.
Yeah,
Apparently, we need to be more specific about what we'll actually do because, well, we've covered Raffy. We've done a few brackets, and this one, good old Damon, part of I don't know what their actual name is, but I know that it's part of the guys who do the Freaky Film Club with Jeremy. He runs or used to run the film club at the college that Jeremy went to. Reached out to us and he wanted us to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and the Satanic Panic of the 80s, 90s.
yeah,
So I've got a couple things and we're gonna go with it. See where this goes, see what happens.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay. So Dungeons and Dragons was first published in 1974. Created by Gary Gygax, which is his actual name, which I feel like if you're born with the name Gary Gygax, like you have no choice but to be the one who creates Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. Sounds
Like,
right.
like that's like what you're not going to become like a senator or, like
Nah.
CEO of Coca-Cola or something like that.
You're
Like,
you're destined for that nerd
yeah.
fandom.
But it was created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Gary Gygax moved to Lake Geneva when he was 7 years old. So
From
Chicago.
Illinois.
Um, Moved back to Chicago for a little bit and then was like, yeah, I don't like it here, and moved back to Lake Geneva where he spent pretty
Smart
much
man,
the rest of his
smart man.
life. Him and Dave Arneson had hooked up there were games that were kind of like Dungeons and Dragons before Dungeons and Dragons, but nothing in the realm of that. They were more like war games. They weren't necessarily fantasy, shield and sword kind of
I,
stuff.
I'm picturing what is that? Is it Risk?
Yeah, Risk, like that kind of stuff, like the painted military guys, like more of that style of game.
Hmm.
Um, I think LARPing maybe existed prior to that. I don't remember from our Renaissance episode when that started, but I feel like it was around the same time. But these guys, so that basically means that Dungeons and Dragons in its initial form was created in Lake Geneva.
Nice. Well,
So,
good
um,
old Wisconsin representing.
but from here on out, we're going to start referring to it as D&D just to save a few syllables of
Uh,
words.
Unless you really want to stretch this.
Well, it depends. But it's commonly referred to as the beginning of the modern role playing game. The tabletop role playing game, the group, where the groups get together and they have the campaign and they got to roll the 20-sided die, and like this is considered to be the father of all of that. Like this is the progenitor, because obviously there's more than just D&D these days. I mean, Star Trek has one, various different Star Wars, Marvel has one, I'm sure DC has one. Um,
Heroes of Barcadia
yes, but that's a little different. I mean, it's
still has a 20-sided dice, so I'm counting it.
right. I mean, it's in the same vein, but it's you don't create a whole character and have
Didn't
whole.
didn't baseball and football do a thing like that where they had like baseball cards with a 20-sided dice?
Oh, I'm sure at some point
You had like
somebody.
the batter, and I'd have to look at my cards downstairs. But I think there's like a batter and a pitcher, and you built a lineup based on your cards, and
I
you'd
seem
roll
to
the
remember
dice.
I seem to remember in the 80s having a game where you had a dice and you would take your own baseball cards and like put them in and like play a version of like like roll the dice and it would be like, "Oh, if your batter has this amount of batting average, like
I
you get
I
a
think it
double or
I think it tells you on those cards like a zero through whatever is a single, a double.
right, yeah. So
I'll look and I'll report
it's
back to you.
okay. It's been a long time. There has been for Dungeons and Dragons. There was an animated. So apparently, it was very popular because it started in 70. Was first published in 74. By 83, it had an animated series on the back when Saturday morning cartoons used to exist. Over time, there has been four live action movies. Um,
Four.
well over 50 video games. I stopped counting at some point. I was like, I can't count all of these. There's just, but it was
Oh,
well.
okay, for the video games, are they all like called Dungeons and Dragons?
I think Boulder
Or
Gate,
I was gonna say it was like Baldur's Gate one, two,
but it was,
three.
but I think Boulder Gate falls into the Dungeons and Dragons umbrella
Got it.
because when I was looking at the list of video games for Dungeons and Dragons, Boulder Gate was on that list and it had all of the games and there was a couple other, spin-offs and offshoots and
All right.
but yeah, there's several hundred novels, one off Broadway play, multiple comic titles, action figures, coloring books, Legos, countless knockoffs, podcasts, uh, D&D groups, and just hundreds upon thousands of pop culture references on any show that wanted to talk about nerd culture.
Yeah.
Big Bang Theory probably made a ton.
I remember them talking more about Catan and
Yeah. I mean,
D&D.
Settlers of Catan definitely comes from this world, like this idea of like having a tabletop game. I mean, there's the tabletop role playing game, although I don't know if it's because Catan is more of a board game than this
Yeah.
is. But so that's what Dungeons and Dragon is. Do you have any experience with Dungeons and Dragons yourself?
As a matter of fact, I do. Today I watched the Dungeons and Dragons movie because I told you I would.
The one with Chris
The new,
Evans? No, not Chris Evans. Chris Pine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I watched that one today,
Okay.
this early this afternoon.
Okay. That was better than it had any right to be, right?
Yeah, it was a little long because I think it was like a little over 2 hours and something. It, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
It had some good action, and the story wasn't bad. I don't know if they're going to make any sequels to it,
I don't
but
know. It did fairly well and critics kind of liked it, so it might I mean, clearly people like Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, we just went over a whole list of, you know,
yeah, it's streaming on Paramount Plus.
I believe
So
that's
I
where.
I mean, it's worth a watch.
Yeah. I can't speak to the other three Dungeons and Dragon movies. I think you
I
said
remember the one from 2000 with Marlon Wayans. That one
right.
was hot garbage.
Yeah, I say I feel like I might have watched that one, but I don't believe I've watched any of the rest. So like, but it's such a weird thing to do a movie based off Dungeons and Dragons since there's no uniform story. There's no
Right.
it's like trying to do a movie from Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or something like that, where like
Yeah,
it's
they'll try.
right. It doesn't stop them, but like, like because every time you get together with your friends and play Dungeons and Dragons, it's a different story. Like, It
Right.
just it changes every time. So how I don't know how, but they found a way to write several hundred novels.
I do remember as a kid, my old neighbors across the pretty corner from us, they would get together and they would do like Dungeons and Dragons on, I don't remember, I'll just one of the Fridays or Saturdays or something like that. So there'd usually be like five, six, seven of them all sitting around playing Dungeons and Dragons. And the only thing I remember was one of the people actually started like crying because when someone defeated it, they took all the treasure and they wanted one of the specific items. They okay, they were probably 12, 13. So it was one of the younger kids. So there were some adults, some kids. But yeah, they like got up crying and because they wanted the shield or whatever of such and such, and someone rolled the dice to loot it all. And I was
Yeah.
like, what is this?
When I was 11
Oh,
or 12,
I was gonna say a young warthog.
when I was a so when I grew up in Memphis, I had a friend named James. And he moved from Memphis to St. Louis. And one summer I went and visited him for a couple weeks. My parents let me go spend like 2 weeks with, and I don't remember if it was like an older cousin or like a younger uncle. There was somebody who was related to him who was older than us, who was into Dungeons and Dragons. And so like we were in the basement and like he was teaching us how to do Dungeons and Dragons, but like I don't think either of us were super interested. So like we had to like create characters and then roll dice and like we were just fucking around. But I remember playing it and then there's some people that we both used to work with at Walmart that had a pretty consistent Dungeons and Dragons group for a while. Um
Yeah.
that like every so often like I don't I think I got the invite to come play every so often, but I was like, you guys have been playing for so long, like I'm good. Like I'm not against it, but like I
Yeah,
don't really.
I'm not committed to trying to get together every week or 2 weeks and have this whole binder, remember these backstories, come up with it.
Yeah, right. I'm just not
I
committed.
could barely do research for this podcast.
Right. Yeah. Like I don't know. Like I have a hard time, staying committed to doing this weekly, let alone doing that as well. So,
Uh,
I mean, more power to you. I mean, if you want to do it and then have fun, then great. It's a fun escape. It's a fantasy world that allows you to get together with your friends and just have fun. Obviously, sometimes, like you said, you had the kid who took it a little bit too seriously, and some people go a little bit too far. But I mean, you know, I don't know if you saw this week that one of the starting pitchers for the Reds or the Guardians had to be a bat boy because he lost in fantasy football. Let's see
no,
if
I didn't see that.
let me see if I can get because it was in this other text chain. Oh, it was the Blue Jays. Chris Bassett, starting pitcher for the Blue Jays, had to serve as a bat boy in one of the preseason spring training games because he came in dead last in the fantasy football league.
All right.
Right? So, I mean, and that's a small punishment compared to some of the other stuff that I've heard people, you
Yeah.
know, having to stay in a Walmart for 24 hours or shave their beards or
Oh,
get
could you imagine?
uh get tattoos. Like, I mean, so any group of people, I was going to say guys, but any group of people that get together and do this kind of thing can take it too far, not just Dungeons and Dragons, which leads.
Would you rather get a tattoo that says I suck at fantasy football or go clean shaving?
Go clean shaven because I can grow it back. Like,
Oh,
like if I can grow this, like surely, and the fact that, I'm almost 50 and my hair is still this thick, it might be a lot more gray than it used to be. I
that's
can grow
true.
it back. Tattoos are kind of forever. Like, I mean, I know they have laser surgery,
You
but
just get a small one on your ankle.
yeah, I mean, you can get one in a place where you can hide it, but it's still there. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't, I have a tattoo and I will get more at some point, but I would rather not get a tattoo that says I suck at fantasy football or get a
Yeah.
unicorn or something like that because, whatever.
All right. Back to regular scheduled programming.
Right. So that's Dungeons and Dragons. Neither of us really have much experience. We know what it is. It is,
I know he's buried in Lake Geneva.
yes, he and did they are they building a statue or did they? I know they got a plaque down there somewhere,
I don't know.
but I mean that's a pretty monumental thing to have, they, create or at least took ideas from this place and this place and this place and kind of put it together. Him and Dave Arneson. But I mean, I mean, to think about like the industry or the world that has been created around the title Dungeons and Dragons, and to go like that's just down the road from here. Like that was in Lake Geneva of all places.
Yeah,
Like that's where this all came from.
pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. Are you aware of an era of time in the history of this country that we refer to as the Satanic Panic?
A little, not a lot. I've watched a couple documentaries here and there and listened to podcasts,
Okay.
but I mean, late
So
80s, I was born, so I don't remember a lot of late 80s, early 90s.
I have vague memories of this, being that I was alive for the entirety of the 80s, but that was ages 2 to 12. So I don't necessarily have,
I was ages born to three.
yeah. So I don't have necessarily the firmest grasp on everything that happened in the 80s. 90s was high school and college, so I do have a firmer grasp of remembering all of that. So there is parts of this I remember. Before we go any further, I'm just going to say that I am not an authority on this. This is all stuff that I have gathered from listening to podcasts and reading Wikipedia and several other articles on like Gizmodo or Time or,
I
like,
feel like that's still more than some people do before they say their authority.
right. Um, so I don't think I'm going to give you any wrong information. I just might not give you all the information. Plus, we're not going to dedicate like a 6 episode arc to this. This is pretty much just going to be whatever we do today. So the Satanic Panic was a moral panic that started in the early 80s and ran into the mid 90s, consisting of about 12,000 or more people who I know what I wrote and I'm trying to say it differently, but I wrote over 12,000 unsubstantiated rumors of satanic ritual abuse. Um, so over the time, they have gone back and studied this. Satanic ritual abuse being not just like a parental abuse of somebody who, abused their child or a stepchild or something like that. We're talking about groups of people who claimed they were Satanist, and I am doing the finger
Air,
quotes,
air quotes.
air quotes, um, that abused children, or people, not just children, sexually, abused them physically, abused them mentally, tortured them, anything. The FBI and many other law enforcement groups have gone back and studied all of this and have found that not a single one of these cases were corroborated and are to this day able to be corroborated.
I feel like you're pronouncing that word.
Corroborated?
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know.
think it.
Something about it.
Okay. So like I said, we need to start with the understanding that not a one of these documented cases, accusations, has ever been substantiated, corroborated, whatever word you want to use. It's thought to have basically kicked off in 1980 when there was a book called Michelle Remembers, that popularized the recovered memory therapy.
Ah, aliens.
No, not aliens. I mean, it
That's what
could,
I think of when I hear the remembered.
I mean, it could have aliens, but a lot of it was, so there was some trauma that happened to you when you were a child that was so bad and so deep that your brain locked it down, so you don't remember it.
Yeah, but they isn't that like the same therapy they would do with people when they would talk about like being abducted and the same
I think that is,
style?
yes. It has widely been discredited, because it's been proven that it's so easy to implant memories in somebody's head when they're in that state. Or if you keep pushing the idea of, instead of saying, "Can you tell me what happened when you were," you describe it like it's, "Tell me what happened when your parent did this or did that. Like you push this idea and you kind of push the narrative that you were abducted, you were abused, you were, whatever. And then you get to the point where you can
Sacrifice to Satan.
right, you get to the point where you convince yourself that this actually happened, even though you can prove definitively it never did. But you can convince somebody so deeply of it that they will believe it, even though like everything flies in the face of them saying it. There are a lot of people who went to jail and that have since been released or are still fighting to this day to be released over this kind of stuff. Because
Hmm.
mainly at this point, recovered memory therapy has been proven to be a crock of shit.
A hoax, a pseudoscience.
Yes. Have you ever heard of the McMartin preschool trial?
Can't say I have.
It also happened in the mid to late 80s. There were 7 people that were charged with over 321 counts of various types of child abuse, involving 48 children. The first accusation started in 1983. The trial happened from 87 to 90. It cost over 15 million, and at the end, every one of them were acquitted of all charges of anything, of any wrongdoing whatsoever. Let me throw out some of the allegations and tell me if you see maybe some problems with where this case starts to fall apart. All right, the first one, sexual abuse. Okay,
Uh,
that's pretty bad.
pretty serious.
Pretty bad and something that actually happens. And I'm not saying that some of these people weren't abused. They absolutely were. What I'm saying is that there weren't a group of cultists or Satanists doing it. All right, this is where stuff gets a little bit questionable, and
On on
people
number
who,
two.
yeah, flying witches.
All right, in
Uh,
Salem.
no, no, this was in California.
Ooh,
Um,
not in the 1600s
no,
or whenever the Salem witch trials were.
yeah, look that up while I'm talking because
Look,
I'm gonna the
look up what?
when the Salem witch trial happened.
Got it.
Um, traveling in a hot air balloon,
How dare they?
underground tunnels where the abuse supposedly took place. Underground tunnels, which to this day have still never been found at the this McMartin preschool. Orgies that happened at car washes and airports. Remember,
That's
this is a preschool.
that's where they usually happen.
Yeah. And children being flushed down toilets to said underground tunnels where then they were abused.
So
Now,
you flush them down. There's a
yes,
release in the there's like a secret hatch in the pipe, and someone's waiting there to catch them like with a baseball glove, like
I guess I don't know.
and
There are people who spent $15 million in 1987 and 1990 money prosecuting people on these charges. 1987, not when did the Salem witch trial happen?
1692 to 1693.
So, not the 1600s, not the 17th
Oh,
century.
yeah, 200 years later.
Right. This was 1987. Right. There were people who were legitimate prosecutors, legitimate lawyers and judges who were like, yeah, this is something that clearly happened. We should try these people.
They don't sound very legitimate to me.
No.
Yeah, I'll take the case that that lady flew away on a broomstick.
Yeah. So, what a lot of people with a recovered memory therapy and a lot of the people who supposedly have these memories of satanic ritual abuse, a lot of it, if you've seen Rosemary's Baby from 1968, The Exorcist from 73, or The Omen from 76, apparently there's a lot of similarities.
Hmm.
A lot of people who've either had these movies described to them or have seen them, all of a sudden, stuff gets stuck in their head, and then you can convince them that these kinds of things happen. You also have in '69 the Manson family murders, which really it was Charles Manson and a group of teenagers
Yeah.
doing terrible, terrible things. So in the '60s, you go from being a super religious society to all of a sudden people starting to question things and drugs. and then the Manson family murders happen, and these movies, and parents get very scared. The conservative parents, or not even just conservative parents, parents are scared now because they see these groups of teenagers who are running wild and killing, Sharon Tate and working for Charles Manson. um
That could be
you
a lot of like the new parents too. They're like,
right,
oh, this is the world that my kid's gonna kind of grow up in.
right. You have a Christian comedian speaker named Mike Warnke, who wrote a book in 1972 called The Satan Seller, where he claims to have led a group of like 1,500 in this satanic ritual abuse before converting, where he talked about sacrifices and rape and drug abuse, and leading all these people to before he was converted magically, and or not magically, but like, and his soul was saved, and now he's going around preaching the word. uh, Somehow from 1972 until 1992, nobody bothered to double check any of the facts from the book to prove that most all of it was just nonsense. But
Hmm.
because he had this authority, and because he was, a lot of Christian leaders were like, "Ooh, this is a guy we can use to sell tickets." They were able to take this book, and on top of everything else that's now happening, um, really kind of push this agenda. A Christian magazine called Cornerstone in 1992 finally was like, there's some things not right about this book. And they were able to debunk it entirely, like every bit of it. It was just a work of fiction. There was like, other than the guy's name being Mike Warnke, I don't think there was a thing that was true about the book.
Wow.
Um,
At least he got his name right.
yeah. So all of these things combined, you have this moral panic happening over here, this a sense of unease in the country with what's happening in California, what's happening over here, what's happening there. You start building all of that up, and you get to this satanic panic where now all of a sudden every crime is Satan. um Last podcast on the left did a long series on Mike Warnke. They did a long series on the West Memphis Three, which is way too complicated to get into, other than to say that there were three boys that were railroaded in the mid to late 90s, because there was a group of little boys that were murdered, and very, very terrible things happened. But these three teenagers were outcast. They wore black clothes. They listened to Metallica. They listened to heavy metal. They didn't go to church, so the town didn't trust them, and they got railroaded and said they did it, and they went to jail for a very long time. One of them got put on death penalty. Thankfully, they were able to get that stopped, and all three of them have since been released, because DNA evidence has proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that they didn't do it.
Hmm.
Um, but this is part of the Satanic Panic, and if you want to know more about that, last podcast on the left has a lot of really great series. Other people have a lot better and a lot smarter than we are.
Yeah,
Um,
they do their research.
there's also a podcast that just started called Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. They're only like 2 episodes in. So far, it's been really interesting. But it's diving deeply into the roots of the Satanic Panic and what happened and how we're still suffering from it today.
Hmm.
All right, so this is where we now cross over D&D and the Satanic Panic, because D&D has been accused of being full of Satanism, witchcraft.
The fantasy role-playing game was
Yes, the
accused
fantasy.
is accused of witchcraft and wizardry.
Right. I don't know what that word is. Oh, suicide. Haha. I should learn how to write better. Suicide, porn, and murder have all been accused. Dungeons and Dragons have all been accused of basically much like. Well, I'm not going to get to that point yet. Hold on a second. I've got a better, more important point to make a little bit later. Let's talk about some of the details about how this little fantasy game that nerds played in their basement all of a sudden gets dragged out into the open, and people start blaming it for stuff. In 1979, a kid named James Dallas Egbert III.
Whoa, that's
Yeah,
that's a nerd ass name.
Attempted suicide in the tunnels under MSU, Michigan State. And then he got lost, went missing. Like he ran away. His parents hired a private investigator and they found him like a month later. He had been known to have played D&D, but he wasn't really into it. There was a rumor that some of the kids at MSU played some version of D&D down in the tunnels at Michigan State. And so all of a sudden now, also in 1979, you had like four channels. So like a story like this got sensationalized. And rather
Yeah.
than going, here's a kid with serious mental problems, they were like, it's D&D. That's what caused this. He eventually actually did kill himself. It's a very sad story. In 1980, um, the private investigator that the family hired to find him uh, came out and wrote a book later that was like his mother was ridiculously overbearing, and the kid couldn't deal with the fact that he was homosexual. Like he came in a background, he grew up in a background that didn't allow him to accept himself for who he was. That's why he killed himself. It had nothing to do with D&D.
That's a sad story.
It is. It's a very sad story. We talked about this movie on our first horror films, like actors who started got their start on horror films. There's a movie called Mazes and Monsters, Tom Hanks' first movie.
Hmm.
The book was written in 81, the movie was done in 82. It used that story as an inspiration, and it really, instead of pushing the thing that actually was the reason behind the suicide, it pushed the story that Dungeons and Dragons, drove this kid insane and drove him to, the point of where it was. There was a Canadian movie called Skullduggery that was made in 83 that was did the kind of the same thing. So, like blaming video games or rock music or Harry Potter or anything else that people blame, things that are relatively harmless, rather than dealing with the real issues. Um, there was a lady named Patricia Pulling, after her son committed suicide in 1982, formed a group called BAD, BADD, Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, I was trying to figure out what that was going to stand for.
Um, she started an advocacy group fighting all role playing games because, again, rather than realizing like your kid was overly depressed and you did nothing, you blamed Dungeons and Dragons. You blamed everybody instead.
She needed somebody to blame.
Right. So from like 1982 to like 1997, she fought and she kept going on all the TV shows, Maury Povich, and you name the talk show from the 80s, she went on it to fight D&D and blame D&D for all the stuff rather than just went like I missed warning signs. I didn't help. I didn't try to help my kid in the way I needed to help. Not to say that all suicide is preventable. Sometimes it's just not.
Right.
I mean, it's a sad thing, and it's hard. Having dealt with it a couple times in my life, you are left with nothing but questions, and you don't. There's no easy answers. And the easy answer of blaming Dungeons and Dragons or Marilyn Manson or Grand Theft Auto or it gives you a convenient scapegoat. You would think that between 1692 and now we would be better than to do what, because I mean basically what happened in 19 from 1980 to 1997 was a modern day witch hunt. We were just smart enough to not burn people at the stake.
Yeah.
We had developed a legal system that kept that from happening.
Roll
But
your 20 sided die to get out of this one.
um there was the Aaron Mankey, the guy who does the lore podcast, did a whole series on this did a whole podcast series on the Salem witch trial that broke down like who was accused, who was actually killed, how many people, but like where it started, how it ended, like the societal impacts of the time. And it's like you listen to that podcast and you're like, how could that possibly happen? How could people allow themselves to get so wrapped up in something that's clearly not real? and some like like even in the 1600s, you had to be like witchcraft isn't real. Like there is supernatural, there is such a thing as that, but like this other stuff doesn't like but like they got so wrapped up into it, the community got in such a fervor that like a fair amount of people got murdered over it because they were accused of being witches. And based on what I was reading, like had we not had a better legal system, that's exactly what would have happened in the 80s. Like we would have seen it happen again. So yeah, the perfect storm of idiocy combined when one group of stupid joined another group of stupid and brought us into basically the modern witch trials. And the Dungeons and Dragons was a convenient scapegoat among many other things, but it was one of the most popular things to scapegoat because it did have the fantasy aspect of it. It did kind of go, ooh, witches and warlocks, and but it was all fantasy.
Uh,
It's no different than Lord of the Rings, like
these people gathering in a basement to play a game and fantasize. It's
right.
evil.
And I mean, people are scared of different and scared of new, and rather than go, oh, this is just harmless fun, or trying to figure out what it is, or come up with something. There's not to say that, like I said, I guarantee you, some bad things happened in Dungeons and Dragons groups. You cannot put a large group of people together and not have some of them do stupid things.
Yeah.
It happens,
Regardless of what they're doing.
right? Um, did people get abused in various different ways in the 80s, the 90s, even up to today? Absolutely. Was it a group of roving satanic cultists that were organized? Absolutely not. It doesn't happen today. It didn't happen then. I don't know how involved you are on reading Twitter, but
No, I'm
there
not. I
there's
try not to be on
yeah,
social medias.
I see it a lot on Facebook and a lot on Twitter, and I don't really read anything on Instagram. I just go, oh look, there's a picture of this guy wearing this uniform now, or I get a lot of baseball on my Twitter, on my Instagram feed. Um, but there is a danger in today's culture of some of this happening again because we, rather than wanting to fix the problem, we just want to the you know blame something. We don't want to be like, bullying is a problem, let's fix bullying. No, clearly it's not bullying. It's not Marilyn Manson anymore. Who No one listens to Marilyn Manson anymore. Who I guess the Five Finger Death Punch. I don't know who's.
Well, I'll leave them out of this.
No, but they're getting blamed for stuff because they're heavy
It's
metal.
it's Grand Theft Auto because you can run
Uh,
around hitting hookers.
right, exactly. So there we go, Damon.
It's probably South Park's fault.
It's probably South, and I'm sure Homer Simpson has something to do with it as well.
That and Peter Griffin.
Yeah. So there you go, Damon. There we go. Dungeons and Dragons and the Satanic Panic of the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry we couldn't be more helpful.
all right. Well,
Or
no.
maybe we were helpful.
All right. This is what this. So hopefully you learned something, and there we go. Hopefully we will take this and go, oh, this is some of the same stuff I see, not necessarily involving Dungeons and Dragons, because I think most people understand that's just harmless fun. But other things that people are like, oh, blaming Taylor Swift for all of the world's ills.
Chiefs winning back-to-back Super Bowls.
Yeah, I'm sure she had something to do with them going to five Super Bowls in 7 years. Not
Probably did.
not because they're a really good football team.
No, Taylor
All right,
Swift.
Taylor Swift. All right. Do you have anything you want to add to the Satanic Panic or the Dungeons and Dragons?
No, just watch the movie.
Okay.
I mean, watch the movie. Even if you don't play Dungeons and Dragons, like neither of us do, we don't really know much of the backstory. We know it's a Wisconsin-based game, so good on that. But even if you don't know the stuff, watch the movie.
There you go. All right. What? Oh, we're now to our everybody's favorite segment. What did we watch this week?
Du-
I haven't
Dungeons
admit
and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. I have an admission to make.
Ooh,
Um, there's a show called The Pit on Max. It's got Noah Weil, the guy from The Librarians and ER, um,
Mm-mm.
Falling Skies.
Mm-mm.
Okay, if you
Three,
saw
three strikes, I'm out.
if you saw him, you'd be like, "Oh, that's Noah Weil." Anyway, The Pit is a medical drama centered in a ER in a Pittsburgh hospital, like in downtown Pittsburgh. But it's kind of like 24 meets ER because like every episode is an hour, and it's real time. So
All
it's
right.
it's it's kind of like it was. Noah Weil is also the only famous person on the show. Like everybody else, like is I've kind of like either some of them I'm like I think I know that guy from somewhere, or most of them are just people who are just background actors who've been given a shot. But it's like halfway through the first season, I think, maybe a little over half. But remember how the streak ended with Guardians of the Galaxy 3?
Ah, yes.
Well, apparently that streak didn't go that long this time either because it
TV,
ended
TV show gotcha.
yeah, it was a tough watch. It's because it's so real. I was hearing somebody say it's one of the most medically accurate shows that's been on TV in a long time.
Since Scrubs.
Well, I know they said, but the Scrubs was medically accurate, but it wasn't really accurate to the world of the hospital. This
No, I
apparently,
mean it's still medically accurate, air
yeah.
quotes there.
But this show, they'd get some real life scenarios and some stuff, and there was a couple of. I don't want to give it away because it's brand new, like it's still happening. I mean, I'm guessing you probably won't watch it anytime soon if you were ever going
That's
to, but
that's
you know,
fair.
our last episode, well, not the one I just put up yesterday, but the last episode before that, we did have 20. We're up to 25. So of the 25 of you, in case one of you wants to watch The Pit, based off my recommendation, I don't want to give it away, but just to say that I've been accused of being a heartless bastard by more than just one person. It broke me. It
Hmm.
broke. It
I'm
was
pretty sure Guardians broke you, and now the floodgates are just you can't close it.
apparently not.
Nah,
It was rough. It was rough.
go rewatch Clerks 3 and see.
Yeah.
See if the floodgates have been broken.
Clerks 3 almost did.
That's why I said go back and rewatch it. See if
Maybe,
it's
maybe, yeah. What else did I watch this week? I mean, I've watched a lot of Beat Bobby Flay. Just keeping up on. There's a show. I caught up with a lot of my half-hour shows like Night Court, St. Denis Medical, Lopez versus Lopez. So that's what I mean. I've been watching just a lot of Pop Culture Jeopardy. That's been a lot of fun. Colin Jost is a really good host. Um, The Floor, which we talked about a lot in the last episode, been really enjoying that.
didn't get to
Game,
that one.
yeah, game shows. So I mean, obviously, give us your Arrowverse update, and then other than Dungeons and Dragons, what did you watch?
Guys, grocery games, Wild Card Kitchen, a lot of the food stuff we like to watch.
Okay,
And then sticking with the Arrowverse. Do you remember what I said last time?
I think you were up to 60 something.
Yes, I just watched Feast of Friends, so I was on 62. Right now I'm on 76.
Ooh, wow, you had a pretty big week.
I had some chunks taken out. The only part that appears to be a struggle when I get to it is once I get into the hundreds, and I have to watch Vixen
Hmm.
because everything I've looked, they only did 2 seasons, and I think it was a web short.
It was the CW app show.
Right. And they were really short episodes from what I'm kind of figuring out.
I never bothered to watch it at the time, but I do remember it existing.
They've basically taken the 2 seasons and turned it into a movie.
I believe that's what I remember.
But like I'm supposed to watch season one, and then there's a pretty substantial gap. I printed off the entire list so I could mark off what I had done. So I'm supposed to go from episode 106 is the first episode of Vixen season one, and then the first episode of Vixen season two is at 200. So
Cool.
there's a big gap. So I'm not quite sure if I should try to find the individual episodes
Or
somewhere
or just watch the movie. And
or yeah, try to figure out where to stop the movie.
do you use that Just Watch app that we've talked about?
I don't think I do.
Yeah. Um, it is. Unfortunately for you, Just Watch does not acknowledge that it. I mean, it acknowledged it exists. It knows that two seasons existed, but it does not know where if it is.
Right.
It
Every
might be on Prime.
that is the movie. I
Okay.
can't find the seasons. So I'm going to struggle with that one.
I have found that with a show like that or shows like that that are not as popular and were more web based or just kind of a little bit older, YouTube tends to be a pretty decent place that somebody might have put each episode up on YouTube. And then, CW might not care enough to fight it.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
just watch isn't going to tell you if something is on YouTube.
because they everything I'm seeing, the runtime is between 4 and 7 minutes per episode.
Ah, that reminds me of the original Clone Wars series that Getty Tartovsky did back in the early 2000s, in between episode one and episode two.
So yeah, the first season is 6 episodes. So what is that? An hour? No, because if it's only 4 minutes, 20
So
for 4 minutes.
yeah, like 30 minutes then,
Yeah.
around.
So
So the whole thing, but I if you can only find the movie, I'd probably just burn it all through and then,
burn it all through again. Well, the first part of the season is straight up watch season one, 1 through 6, straight through. But then when it gets to the second part, it's like watch episode one, and then it's Supergirl, Flash, Arrow, DC, and then Vixen. So then it's supposed to be four things between it. So I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to go about getting through it. I'm sure I'll figure it out. But yeah. So as you could tell, I did put a pretty sizable dent in that, and I'll
I
continue
mean,
doing that. I'm on episode 76,
of 800 something you said.
803rd.
Ooh.
So I'm almost 10% of the way done.
You are way more committed to this than I thought you would be. I'm impressed so far.
Yeah, I know. I'm usually under that category of, well, yeah, I'm gonna watch this. And then 2 episodes in, I'm like, yeah, I'm done. But I'm still under the parts right now of everything I've already seen.
Okay.
So it'll be like on while I'm doing dishes or stuff like that, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I know what's happening. So it's gonna get to a point though where I'm gonna actually have to start watching it, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. I think that Supergirl might be the challenging one when it gets to the last season or two of Supergirl, just because that's kind of what broke me.
Supergirl doesn't come into play until episode 118 is the first episode of
Well, the
Supergirl.
first couple seasons of Supergirl were really good, so you're going to enjoy that. It's just the last two that were challenging. Um, I think Batwoman, the first, I never watched the second season. The first season was challenging as a watch.
Let's see, when does Batwoman show up? Episode 495.
So you're a couple months away from that.
Yeah. As I said, I'm just trying to get through this by the end of the year. That was my goal for the year, was to just watch the Arrowverse, because I think they're done with everything.
I believe so. I believe
Because the last thing is just the last,
Superman and Lois,
yeah.
which I
And I,
think just ended.
yeah, so that would be it. I didn't realize the Flash went on as long as it did. Did you know the Flash went that long?
Yeah, I watched it. I didn't watch the last couple seasons because I couldn't take it anymore.
The last episode of The Flash was May 24th, 2023. And the first episode was October 7th of 2014.
Yeah, I guess I don't remember it running that long. I just know that, there was a lot of other nonsense that was taking place, and I just was like, I can't. Well, when I cut cable and then I changed streaming services, the CW was on one and then they changed to another and then they tried to move to their own streamer, but I don't, it got too hard to keep up with it. So like I'd have to wait for seasons
Yeah,
and then a whole bunch of the outside of the show stuff happened and I was just like, I'm done. I can't.
that's fair.
And
So yeah,
I don't think I'm gonna commit to watching 800 something episodes.
not with that attitude.
No, no, unless I get a treadmill and put it down here in the basement.
I have one in the bedroom, so sometimes I'll be walking on it and I'll watch an episode or two while I'm on there.
Because I bought the entire DVD box set of the X Files a long time ago. Well, I mean, at the time it was the entire box. Now they've done like two seasons that I'll have to go out and buy. But I have the X Files, the original run, and then the two movies on DVD. And like part of me wants to rewatch it, but like I think like if I buy myself a treadmill and like be like you can rewatch it, but you can only watch it if you're on this machine.
Yeah,
You know.
go watch an episode or two and take a walk.
Yep. So anyway, um, anything you got coming up, or okay.
Nope, just still listening to draft stuff, watching draft highlights on different prospects for the Packers,
Are you gonna
which
make any attempt at going up there?
I don't know. Right now, I'm kind of debating. I'm going back and forth, but I know is it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday? I think it's Thursday,
I
Friday, Saturday.
yeah,
So
I
I'm like,
say
I
I think
I would have to
historically,
take off of work, and I just don't know if it's really worth it.
yeah, I've never understood why people go and want to watch the draft anyway.
I think, well, the NFL does a big thing where there's lots of stuff to do besides just the draft. They've got different I don't know, they have different exhibitions set up and different interactive things you can do, and so
Well,
something like that.
in the 10 years I lived in Atlanta, whenever I think the Super Bowl came through Atlanta twice when I lived there. And that Super Bowl fan experience was a lot of fun. Like you'd go buy a ticket and then go and like they had all the booths set up and like they would just hand out. So you'd walk away with so much free food and just random swag and contests you could enter and like booths you could sign up to like meet players. When I went out to the All-Star game in California, when I was at the Angel Stadium 15 years ago, 16 years ago, there was the All Star Fan Fest. I've done that a couple times when I was out in San Francisco for a job that I had. The All Star game was there that year. I didn't get to go to the All Star game, but I went to the Fan Fest. Um,
Yeah,
so I mean, I assume it's something similar to that, where
right.
like they have all kinds of just events set up, and
I almost want to go just to say I've done it, but I'm also like, man, that's seems too peoply for me.
that is the problem. There's just too many, and I said I heard they were talking about it on the radio this week, and I guess it was at Detroit last year, and they had like 700,000 people.
Yeah,
So because it's Green Bay, like I think they're only projecting like 250,000, but that is a lot of people in a very small town.
right.
And I was
Yeah.
like, and I'm guessing at this point, if you don't have a hotel room or an Airbnb, you're not getting one.
Yeah, I'd probably only go up there for a day or two, or for a day, I'll just drive up.
But yeah,
I, I have a cousin who lives a couple, like 2 miles from the stadium, so
oh,
I could just park there and walk.
I have zero interest in going to.
I have an interest. Whether or not I'm actually going to do it is a whole nother story.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I guess then at this point, just remember, think to yourself, is this fantasy game that's causing no harm, or is this Harry Potter over here, or is Metallica causing any problems? And your answer is yes. Just remember, Stupid never walks alone.
Ooh.
Comic books have been around for almost a century, and in the last 2 decades, we've finally gotten to see many of these characters brought to life in movies and on TV. On the Moving Panels podcast, we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. Join me and my guests as we discuss both the good and the bad from Marvel, DC, and even some of the lesser-known comic book companies. Learn what is and isn't from the comics, as well as our nerdy review of the movie or show. New episodes drop every Monday, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. So join us for Moving Panels, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.